So the WA Dingo Association is a non-profit organisation formed in 2005 by a small collection of WA dingo enthusiasts and guardians. With membership growing, we now count international scientists amongst our ranks. Our focus is on public education regarding the dingo and to create more awareness of this much maligned native Australian wolf, the living ancestor of all domestic dog species. Many myths and fallacies surround the dingo. Naturally timid, diminutive animals, they're very gentle, loving and affectionate. They favour flight over fight any day, so they'll run away before they'll come up and bite you. Evolving and adapting in the Australian environment for 18 to 28,000 years, the dingo fills the role of the ecological stabiliser. It's been proven where stable dingo packs live, there's greater biodiversity. Where they are absent, introduced predators such as your feral fox and cat decimate the environment and the native flora and fauna. Currently being studied by scientists at Harvard University, USA. They're thought to be as intelligent as some higher order primates. In their native country, official policy in many states class them as unprotected, to be wiped out at every opportunity. Yet some have them listed as a vulnerable native species, protected by law. Without further research, the dingo will go the way of the thylacine. The dingo is a free-roaming canid found only in Australia. It is currently classified as a subspecies of the grey wolf, Canis lupus. Right? Although new DNA evidence has now suggested that the dingo is not a subspecies of the wolf, but evolved parallel to the wolf and is a living ancestor of all domestic dog breeds. The dingo is not a descendant of domestic dogs gone wild, but a living fossil, the first proto-dog. The dingo's habitat ranges from deserts to grasslands and to the edges of the forest. Dingoes are very social animals, living in bonded for life pairs and small family packs of up to 10. The dingo is the largest terrestrial predator in Australia and plays an important role as an apex predator. Current management practices are exacerbating the issues of hybridisation and pack dispersion. Stable packs with hierarchical structure will rarely interact and breed with domestic dogs and other canids. Territories are defended fiercely. For many Australians, the dingo is a cultural icon, and because of this, there is fear that the species will be becoming extinct, as has happened with the thylacine. Dingoes also have a prominent position in the Aboriginal art, in the Aboriginal culture, as part of their stories and ceremonies, and they're depicted on rock paintings and carvings and so forth. The dingo is a free-roaming canid. Oh, here we go again. I knew you tripped me up, Lee. So Australian or southern wolf, dingoes are native to Australia. Commonwealth legislation applies an arbitrary date of 1400 AD to define whether fauna and flora are native species. However, DNA and carbon dating and weathering evidence of Aboriginal rock art depicting dingoes effectively disputes the claim of introduction by Asian seafarers 4,000 years ago. Some art has been dated at 28,000 years of age. So dingoes probably migrated here 28,000 years ago during the Pleistocene age when the sea levels were 180 metres lower. Came across with the first Indigenous tribes that settled in Australia. They come in three colours. You see the naughty up there and then the nice. So that's genuine white, black and tan and ginger, which is where all your species of Australian cattle dog and kelpies come from. So social life of the dingo. They're very social animals. They live alone or in mated pairs. They bond for life. It's a matriarchal society. The alpha female rules the pack, so she's boss, mum says. Breeding occurs once a year. Puppies are always born in winter and usually on average about 5 pups. Only the alpha female will fall pregnant. She'll stop the other females in the pack from raising their own packs, so she's boss. The father helps raise the pups, as do the aunties as well, some lactating to sort of feed the extra milk for the alpha's pups. In hard times, related pack members from other groups will come together to team up to prey on the larger kangaroos for survival out in the wild. The pack sizes rarely exceed 10. In the wild, dingoes will only live for about 7 to 9 years. It's pretty hard for them out there, but in captivity, 28 years of age is not unheard of. So I've got a long time with that lot out there. Scientific studies show that where stable dingo packs are present, biodiversity is greater. The dingoes protect the native fauna by excluding introduced predators such as foxes and feral cats, actively by scenting and actively by hunting. They maintain the healthy fauna, like I said, by preying on the weak and the injured and the infirm, much like the lions do in Africa. And without an apex predator, herbivore populations will explode and they can just clear the land of vegetation. So you take the dingo out of the picture, your rabbits, your goats, your pigs, your kangaroos, everything, they just explode. There's no control there. This is a tricky bit. Every state and territory has differing legislation regarding the dingo, and this is what gets me quite tripped up and annoyed in many times. Dingoes and their hybrids in South Australia are appointed pests in the sheep industry, south of the dingo fence. They've got to be controlled and they can only be kept in captivity by authorised zoos and wildlife parks. North of the dingo fence, however, they're regarded as legitimate wildlife, and although they're not protected, they're only given certain protection 35 kilometres north of that fence. So if they step out of that zone, bang. In Northern Territory, the dingo is regarded as protected, not threatened, and native under their Territories Act. The dingo in the Northern Territory is regarded as having important conservation value because of interbreeding with other domestic dogs is very low in that area. However, if a dingo comes into a farm area, and it can be legally killed when it's a danger to the livestock industry. In Queensland, dingoes and their hybrids are regarded as pests under the Land Protection Act. All landowners are legally committed to reduce the numbers of wild dogs on their lands. Now, the dingo is regarded as wildlife and native wildlife under the Nature Conservation Act of '92 and is a natural resource, therefore protected in conservation areas. Outside of these areas, dingoes are not regarded as native Australian and are not protected. Dingoes and their hybrids can only be kept in wildlife parks and zoos by agreement. In New South Wales, the Rural Lands Protection Act of '98 allocates wild dogs the status of pests and demands from landowners pretty much the same thing, that they shall decimate and eradicate them. Dingoes are not regarded as protected under the National Parks and Wildlife Act of '94. The dingo is regarded as a native species under the Threatened Species Conservation Act, though, in '95. But the Wild Dog Destruction Act of 1921 includes dingoes in its definition of wild dogs. Okay? So this law only affects the western part of the state where landowners are committed to control wild dogs. The law forbids private ownership of dingoes in that region. In other parts of the state, though, dingoes can be kept as pets under the Companion Animals Act of 1998. So there's three bits of conflicting. Victoria, wild dogs and dingoes are regarded as established pests under the Catchment and Land Protection Act of '94. Landowners, the same, have to hinder the spreading of the wild dogs on their land and to eradicate them as much as possible. The term wild dog includes all dingoes, feral domestic dogs, dogs who become wild, and certain crossbreeds, except for recognised breeds like your Australian cattle dog. Dingoes are granted a certain protection in areas that are managed by national parks, but since 1998, it is possible to own dingoes as pets. At the time, there was a possibility that pure dingoes may become officially classified as protected species, and according to official statements, that would not stand in conflict with control measures against wild dogs. And in 2008, dingoes were officially declared a threatened species in danger of extinction and are now protected, but only when they're in private ownership. So you need a licence for them. In this ACT, dingoes are regarded as protected under the Nature Conservation Act, but on private land, killing of the wild dogs is allowed when you have the territory's permission. Tasmania, well, the import of dingoes to Tasmania is forbidden, and this is the interesting one. Here in WA, dingoes and their hybrids are regarded as declared animals under the Agriculture and Related Resources Protection Act of 1976. Populations have to be controlled and can be kept as pets under certain conditions, depending on which council you're with. Now, the dingo is the only native vertebrate animal currently listed as unprotected under the West Australian Wildlife Conservation Act of 1950. The lack of welfare protection in dingoes is one of the biggest issues, which I hope to clarify a bit today. Dingoes are directly or indirectly exempt from protection under animal welfare and cruelty legislation. As was stated by the President of the Australian Law Reform Commission, a major loophole in animal welfare legislation seemingly fails to protect many animals, including pest animals. In addition, specific legislation dealing with management and eradication of invasive animals also fails to regard the welfare of dingoes. For example, Section 24 of the Animal Welfare Act 2002 here in WA creates an express defence against cruelty prosecution under the Act when killing pests. Similar exemptions apply in other states. Many statutes dealing with dingo or wild dog control make no mention of animal welfare, and those that do make it clear that only certain animals, such as protected or endangered animals, deserve welfare consideration. For example, Section 54 of the Wildlife Conservation Regulations 1970 here in WA makes it clear that protected fauna enjoy a very different standard of welfare to non-protected fauna. The provision outlines illegal means and devices that may not be used to take or kill fauna. These include traps likely to cause suffering to trapped animals, explosives, poisons, and others. These provisions are qualified and do not apply to fauna that has been declared to be not protected under Section 14 of the Wildlife Conservation Act, such as the dingo. Another example of lack of animal welfare consideration arises indirectly through the registration and approval process of poisonous substances. A recent review of the 1080 monosodium sodium fluoroacetate by the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority did not include welfare considerations in their decision to approve the continued registration of 1080 for dingo control. The report conceded that there is a strong public concern about the humaneness of 1080. However, animal welfare is not a specific criterion under the AgVet codes, so it's not taken into account in making decisions about the future use of 1080. 1080 is manufactured in the United States, and 1080 has been banned for use in the United States, while Australia uses an average of 200 kilograms each year. So it's made over there and imported here. 2005 parliamentary inquiry recommended to amend the legislative criteria under which the APVMA operates to expressly include consideration of animal welfare at the time registration of poisons is first considered. To date, no such amendment has been made. Further evidence of inadequate emphasis on animal welfare can be found by examining the inconsistent regulations of the same control methods across jurisdictions. A control method frequently gaining attention due to animal welfare concerns is the use of this little beauty here, the leg hold trap. Vibration's been detected. So now, in 1863, Charles Darwin declared that the leg hold trap, one of the cruelest devices ever invented, and offered £50 to the RSPCA as a prize to be won by the inventor of an alternative to the trap. 150 years on, leg hold traps are still used in Australia despite being banned in 80 countries because of their negative effect on animal welfare. And you can see there, it's not a pretty device, and it's safe, so don't touch it. Won't hurt. There is no uniform legislation governing the use of these leg hold traps in Australia, and the inconsistency of their permitted use clearly shows the wide discrepancy of emphasis on animal welfare across jurisdictions. In some states, such as Tasmania, the use of steel jaw traps is prohibited. Other states have enacted legislation to modify these steel jaw traps in an effort to make them more humane. How you can do that, I don't know. For example, in New South Wales, steel jaw traps are prohibited, while certain restricted traps and padded traps are permitted. In South Australia and West Australia, steel jaw traps for the control of dingoes are permitted, and the trap's jaws are laced with strychnine. A trapping permit in the ACT allows the use of restricted traps, but the legislation fails to give a definition of a restricted trap. Some legislation actually describes steel jaw traps as an inhumane device and then go on to permit the use. For example, as mentioned here in WA, the Animal Welfare Act 2002 creates an offence against the use of a prescribed inhumane device on an animal. Jawed traps are a prescribed inhumane device, yet as stated, they're permitted to be used for the use of dingo control. And again, 1080 poison. Now most of this is taken directly from the RSPCA's website, their view. The RSPCA has conducted a review of the available science on the humaneness of the effect of 1080, and the evidence indicates that 1080 is not a humane poison. Trapping, same thing. The RSPCA is opposed to any method of control that does not result in a humane death. Current methods of trapping do not meet this requirement, as animals that are caught in traps can suffer greatly for considerable time before they are killed. Now, some of these animals might be trapped for up to 5 days or so before the dogger comes back and checks his trap and shoots them. It's not like going craypot fishing. This is serious. The poor animals suffering for days. Recreational hunting. The RSPCA Australia is opposed to hunting of any animal for sport as it causes unnecessary injury, suffering, distress or death to the prey animal. The term hunting for sport includes hunting with hounds, coursing, pig hunting, bow hunting and all forms of recreational shooting. Okay, I hope that didn't distress too many of you. So it's time for a change. There is overwhelming scientific evidence that the dingo, as our only terrestrial apex predator, is vital for a healthy, balanced ecosystem. Yet the dingo is still not even listed in the current Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act of '99. The dingo must be included in legislation under its correct taxonomy, Canis species dingo, and the purebred dingoes, Canis species dingo, to be excluded from the declaration on the list of declared animals. There must be uniform federal legislation giving the dingo protection as a vulnerable native species, as recognised internationally already by the IUCN. Inhumane and barbaric methods like this of control must cease immediately, and it should not be a defence of law to be legally cruel because of an animal's status. This is the 21st century. A halt on all control practices in areas of no pastoral or agricultural significance, for instance mining companies where there's no impact on the agricultural business. The creation of real conservation areas here in WA where pure dingo populations are fully protected. The formation of a conservation and research establishment in WA dedicated to the dingo, and a complete and independent review of wild dog dingo management programs and practices with special regards to animal welfare and consideration given to published scientific evidence regarding the dingo's role in the Australian ecosystem and net benefits to native fauna and flora biodiversity when stable pack structure is retained. And I've done it. Thank you very much.